Good afternoon, everyone. It's our great honor to have you today because we have a great speaker today with us, Dr. Professor Annick de Houwer. So, Annick, I couldn't see your face. Could you turn on your camera? Ned, can you hear what I'm saying?
Dr. Sun, yes, I can hear.
Okay. Here is Annick. Hello, Annick. Are you in? Annick, you are muted.
Yes, I'm in. I got thrown off, but now
Yeah.
I'm back.
I'm panicking for a moment because we lost our speaker. Okay, great. Now we formally start. So like always, I won't introduce myself, but introduce our dear speaker first. So as I mentioned, today is our great honor to have Dr. Professor Annick de Houwer with us because she's very busy and I thank her a lot for sparing her time with us. So here is a very, very short bio of Dr. Annick de Houwer. Dr. Annick de Houwer is director of the Harmonious Bilingualism Network and is president of the International Association for the Study of Child Language, YASCO. She trained in linguistics and has held professional positions at several universities, Antwerp and Alfred, Germany. In the US, she has been affiliated with the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, and was a visiting scholar at several top institutions. Dr. de Houwer, her research focus is on bilingual and monolingual children's language development, addressing both linguistic and social psychological aspects of language development. Her 19
大家还有什么问题吗？机会难得哈。
Sorry, can all our audience turn off your audio? Thank you. Dr. Annick de Houwer, her 1990 separate development hypothesis for early bilingual morphological acquisition has found confirmation across the globe. She created the now widely cited concept of harmonious bilingualism. And she has published many well-cited papers and is author of 4 famous books: The Acquisition of Two Languages from Birth, a case study, bilingual first language acquisition, An Introduction to Bilingual Development, and Bilingual Development in Childhood. So a lot of things, a lot of achievement. So I couldn't say it in a very short manner. So, but today it's our great honor to hear some of the recent findings by Dr. de Houwer. So, Annick, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, many thanks to Dr. Houwer and the National Institute of Education. I'm now going to try sharing my screen in the hopes that it will work. Okay. All right, so I hope that you can all see this. Everything fine? Okay, good. So let's see what we can say about harmonious bilingualism and how we can support it. And again, I'm not able to, all right, now I got it. Okay, so again, I want to thank Dr. Houwer, the National Institute of Education, for the gracious invitation. I also want to thank Nathaniel Hong for the technical support. And if you have any, I'm not going to really add research references to this talk in detail. Just at the very end, you'll see a reference to my latest book from 21. But if you want research references and if you have any questions, please do feel free to email me at this address that you're seeing right there. So there will be questions at the end of this talk also, which you are invited to mention in the chat. Okay, so, oopla, I'm so sorry. There's things going on that I don't like. Okay, I want to stick on this one because this is how it all starts, with love. You know, two hearts coming together in many, many instances. I know that there are other reasons for getting married, but this is a main one that we idealize, right? People get together and get married. And yeah, and then they create a family. And in today's increasingly globalized and diversified world, there are increasing numbers of young families who find themselves in a bilingual setting. Yeah. And they don't necessarily have much personal experience with early childhood bilingualism. They wonder how to raise their child bilingually. They even wonder whether they should raise their child bilingually. And yeah, there are many worries about whether early bilingualism will be a positive or a negative experience for their children and their families. So it's true, yes, indeed, we have to recognize this, that early bilingualism can be a negative or less than positive experience for children and their families. And instead, presumably, this is what families want, namely harmonious bilingualism. And this harmonious bilingualism refers to a sense of subjective well-being and satisfaction as it is experienced by families in a language contact situation. So a language contact situation is where two languages basically come together. So it's a bilingual setting, actually, yeah. And that there is a sense of subjective well-being and satisfaction in the absence of negative experiences that people think are due to the linguistically diverse bilingual situation. Okay. Now, having a sense of subjective well-being anywhere, including in a bilingual setting, is of course intensely personal. I cannot really, judge for you whether you're having a sense of subjective well-being. You would have to tell me about that. But at the same time, there is quite a lot of evidence that there are two main hallmarks of harmonious bilingualism. So, and what are they? Well, I'll first discuss one of them. Namely, the first one is that there is a general acceptance of the fact that children are growing up with two or more languages. Now, an acceptance, so not necessarily a positive attitude, but it could be a neutral attitude. But what we don't want is negative attitudes. Those are not good. They stand in the way of harmonious bilingualism. And often there are negative attitudes towards early child bilingualism and towards a specific home language or languages. And who hold these negative attitudes? Well, parents themselves may hold negative attitudes. Quite implicitly so. They may not actually realize that until they have a bilingual child. Relatives also of those parents. So pediatricians may hold negative attitudes. Childcare workers may hold negative attitudes. Teachers may hold negative attitudes. Family friends may hold negative attitudes, and there may be a general negative attitude in society. And let me tell you, even researchers may hold negative attitudes. So that's not good. Okay, so these negative attitudes, here is an example of what it can lead to, a negative attitude. So here's an example of a couple where the father is Italian and speaks Italian, parlo italiano. And he got married to this lady who is from Germany. So ich spreche Deutsch, she speaks German, but she also speaks Italian, parlo italiano. They fell in love. But the husband the father doesn't really, well, he doesn't understand German. He doesn't really like German. He thinks having two languages is too difficult for children also. And, his wife, well, she kind of goes along with that, and she decides not to speak German to her children, so only Italian. And there are those kids who speak only Italian, because if they don't hear any German, they're not going to learn it. But there was a negative attitude towards German on the part of the father, and on the part of the mother, she doesn't have a negative attitude to German, but she has a negative attitude, or she's worried about child bilingualism, because somehow she thinks there's not enough space in little children's heads. They're very small, the heads, yeah. And a lot of people think of our minds like boxes. It's true that our brains are inside a sort of a box. Namely, we can hold the box, right? You can all hold your box. And inside it is a brain. And there's only limited space for your brain. But is there only limited space for your mind? No. Your mind can learn until, well, you're very old, as long as your brain functions perfectly well, right? So our mind is not a box, but still there is this idea. Many people have that idea, and that causes a lot of problems. And back to some other people, so important people in the lives of young families, pediatricians. Here is an example. This particular example is sort of fictional, but it is rooted in many, 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 many experiences from bilingual families that have been mentioned in the literature. People have told me about these kinds of things. This is still happening today. This is an example of Mylin, who lives in the United States and who hears Mandarin and English at home. But Mylin is not speaking at age 2. So that means she's not producing any words, let alone little sentences. Now that constitutes a clear language delay. It really does. We do expect by age 2 that children are at least saying a lot of words and also starting to combine 2 words into teeny little sentences. So the parents are concerned about this and go to the pediatrician. And the pediatrician thinks that Mylin is language delayed because she is hearing 2 languages. Well, let me tell you quite strongly so that, there is this myth of that a bilingual environment leads to problems in children's language development, is too difficult for children, for young children. Well, let me tell you quite clearly that a bilingual environment presents no threat to children's language development. It is not a cause of language delay, whatever pediatricians might think. And unfortunately, there are some researchers around who keep saying this and who are then believed by pediatricians because what these researchers are saying confirms their own negative attitudes. But it is just absolutely not true. And in a case like this, where a child is not speaking at age 2, the first thing you have to do is check the child's hearing, because in so many instances, that is a real underlying problem. Namely, children are just not picking up the language. So if they've had a lot of ear infections, that may be why they're not speaking, because they haven't heard enough language. So in fact, that's when we often hear that then these children who are not speaking by age 2, they're advised to give up one of the languages as if this would solve everything. No, then by age 3, children are still not talking. And by then, oops, yeah, the pediatrician finally checks the hearing. Oops, child has a big hearing problem. Oops, that's terrible. That's really in the young life of a child. It's giving a lot of problems. And of course, a child who doesn't hear well, who cannot express him or herself by age 2, 2.5, 3 is a very difficult child and becomes a very behaviorally very, very difficult. So this does not contribute to family harmony. Okay, so there needs to be a general acceptance of the fact that children are growing up with 2 or more languages, and that does, it shouldn't be made into a problem. But then when we're gone with that, or that's in place, another hallmark of harmonious bilingualism is that children who regularly hear 2 or more languages, that they speak both of them well, that we find really contributes to children's harmonious bilingualism, to their well-being, and to families' well-being as well. The problem is, well, across the globe, that as many as 1/4 to 1/5, so 1/4 is really a lot, of children who grow up with multiple languages, that they speak only a single language, the school language. And when I say across the globe, there's research even from Australia, from Aboriginal, Indigenous communities that confirms this. And it's very sad. And yes, it is indeed sad that children cannot speak or do not speak one of the languages they hear at home, because these kinds of things can happen. Namely, it may be impossible for children to communicate with members of their extended family and or family friends, excuse me. Also, communication between parents and children may be adversely affected, so negatively affected. There may be also misunderstandings going on. So parents speak one language and the child responds in another language. That maybe also the parent doesn't really know very well. That's also possible, right? And both parents and children may feel a sense of loss of identity, whatever that is, however you want to define it. But they may feel such a sense of loss, and a sense of loss of culture, and very importantly, emotional bonding. Now, if there's one thing that is really super important in family life, it is the early bonding and attachment between parents and their children. And that is really such an important basis for children to grow up from. If they lack that, life becomes really very hard for them. Yeah, it's very difficult to make up for that later. So in this sense, this early language choice, early language use is really important. And also, when they become young adults, children may be very angry with their parents for not making sure that children grew up speaking the parents' language. And Janice Nakamura in Japan has given this a very good term, I think. It's called language regret. Okay. Oh, why did that happen? I don't know. Now, often teachers or doctors even advise, as I mentioned with the pediatricians, who sometimes then say, oh, well, stop speaking that language that we don't use here and it'll be fine. Yeah, your kid will be fine. So they advise parents to stop speaking the language that is not a school language. And maybe you people in the audience have experience with that. Well, let me tell you, it does not help in learning the school language. So I'm talking about the school language basically as the term for the language that's being used in the greater environment in which children are living. I realize that in Singapore, there isn't just necessarily one school language, but school languages maybe is what I should have said there, but I'm addressing a lot of people internationally here with this talk. So doesn't help in learning the school language. It's not because, think of playing an instrument, a musical instrument. So suppose that you play the piano and you also play the violin, yeah? Now, if you stop playing the violin, is this going to help you play the piano better? No. What's going to help you play the piano better is practicing the piano more, okay, and better. It's not because you take a skill away that another skill is going to immediately blossom. It's not that, it doesn't work like that. What's more fundamentally important also is that it is morally unacceptable. You know, think of how you would feel if somebody told you to give up talking your language to your child. It's not, you know, it's against human rights. And in fact, yes, it is. It goes against the United Nations Convention for Child Rights, which has been ratified by most countries in the early 1990s. Now, never mind that there's a lot going on that's against child and human rights in the world. That doesn't make it right. Yeah. So it's really important. So we have here Article 29 that says that the states parties agree that the education of the child shall be directed to the development of respect for the child's parents, his or her own cultural identity, language, and values, and of course also for the national values of the country in which the child is living and the country from which he or she may originate, and for civilizations different from his or her own. So that is the education of the child. So this is what actually institutions should be doing. Educations, schools basically should be doing, is really develop respect for all the languages that children are bringing to the classroom. Now, of course, luckily, so there are these things, but which go against harmonious bilingualism. But luckily, several studies show that there are higher levels of proficiency, language proficiency, that higher level in the first language, so that's in children who are first having a first language and then add a second language, that the better that their first language is developed, that then it's easier for them, or they develop much faster in their second language. So that is really something good. And what's really important is that well-developed proficiency in two languages strengthens and supports the well-being and integration of children who are growing up bilingually. And there's been some very important research out of Singapore by Dr. Houwer that speaks to these issues. So now, of course, there are many reasons why children may not be speaking the language they hear at home well or at all, but you can turn, you know, I've just realized that I phrased these reasons in a negative way, more or less. We could, you know, this title should be actually, there are many reasons why children will develop, you know, good high proficiency in both languages. It has to do in a way with community expectations and attitudes, so positive attitudes, as already mentioned, including children's attitudes, which become more and more important as children get older. And then what's so important is the frequency with which children hear each language. So that's relative frequency, so which language is heard more frequently. So typically the language that children hear more frequently over a period of time is going to be higher developed than a language they hear less frequently. And this all applies to young children under age 6. In addition, it's also the absolute level of the frequency. So if you hear a language very little, you know, even though it's more than another language, if you don't hear it a lot, then you're not going to be able to learn it so well. So then there is also something called the quality of child-directed speech. Child-directed speech is the way that we talk to children. There is a particular way of speaking to children. And already this starts with speaking to babies, and how we speak to babies is so important because that's where it all starts. They have to be able to process. So, you know, to work with that which they're hearing, you know, they have to process it in their mind in order to build up and construct their own language skills. Yes. And we know from research out of Seattle at the University of Washington, Patricia Kuhl has shown that already at age 6 months, there is a difference between children, how well they can distinguish between particular sounds, and it is based on how clearly their mothers articulate. So this is really important. And that's what I mean. The quality of child-directed speech is one thing, is, how well do you articulate? Do you use this up and down, this very special kind of baby talk, which is supposed to help children, to gear them towards the important parts of what you're saying to them? And many other things, also like responding to children's questions, for instance. It's as basic as that. So all of that goes under the quality of child-directed speech. Now, super important, especially in a bilingual setting, is the communicative need for active use of each language. So children will learn to speak. They learn to speak generally because they need to express their needs. It's very simple. So that's also when just one language is involved. Yes, and when two languages are involved, they also have this need to express their own needs and desires. And they will do it in two languages if that's what's necessary. It's very simple like that. And that communicative need is so important. And I will say quite a bit more about that in a moment. And then, of course, practice makes perfect. It's like playing the piano, like playing the violin. The opportunities for children to actually speak each language are so important. They need to learn to speak. They've never spoken before. They're very little. They have no automatic speaking patterns yet, which I, as an adult, being the age that I have, yes, I have developed these automatisms, really. Children still need to develop those. And it's really important that they do speak a lot, because this is going to really increase their speaking capability. Okay. Now, and there's lots of, like here I say, identity issues. Yeah, who do children want to identify with, for instance? That's all going to play a role as well. And there are many more factors. Okay. But it's complicated, that's for sure. But that doesn't mean we don't know anything, okay? Luckily. What we do know is that the way that the languages are divided amongst the parents in the home, that can explain a lot. Now, of course, I realize there are also single parent families. I won't discuss that at the moment, but I do have some data about that as well. Anyway, here, when I'm talking about parental home language choice patterns, well, I've published a study a long time ago that's being cited tremendously often. And, basically, in a bilingual setting, there are these 5 logically possible possibilities when you look at the parent pair. Yeah, so both parents could speak language X, which here means any language that is not the school language. So there's a basic distinction between the school language and not the school language. Yeah. Because remember previously I mentioned that 1/5 up to 1/4 of children do not speak the language that is not used in school. So that's like a huge divide. What language are we dealing with, right? Okay, so first possibility is both parents speak the same X language at home. Second possibility is both parents speak the same X language, and in addition, one parent speaks the school language at home. Then we have the third possibility where both parents speak both languages at home. And then we have the fourth possibility, the so-called one parent, one language situation, where one parent basically only speaks the X language and the other parent only the school language. And then we have the 5th logical possibility, where both parents speak the school language at home and one parent in addition the X language. So those are for 2 languages. Those are the, all the possibilities. I've also done research on families that use, 3 or 4 different languages. And of course, there it gets much more complicated. Anyway, let's have a look at what happens to the X language. What is the percentage of children within each group that actually speaks the X language? Well, it's color-coded, and you can see it goes from green to red. So green, the two greens on top, there's no statistically significant difference between them. So it's got to do with both parents speaking the X language, definitely. But in addition, maximally one parent speaks the school language. So that's pretty fine. It's not 100%, but then in language, very little is 100%, okay? Then we get to the yellow block or the orange block, whatever. Again, no difference, no statistically significant difference between 78% and 73% there. So it really doesn't matter. You know, often it's said, no, parents should speak just one language to their child. Well, or the one parent, one language setting. Well, there you go. No, it's really, there's no difference with whether both parents speak both languages to their child. And definitely with 73%, it's very far removed from the 93% success for kids speaking the X language that we see there more up on this table. And there, the really bad, well, if you want your children to speak the X language, maybe you should not present the X language in the way that many parents do, namely they both speak the school language at home, and in addition, one parent speaks the X language. Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes it can't be helped. I realize that, especially if your partner does not understand the X language, that could be a real problem. So in these situations, perhaps one parent is speaking the X language only when the other parent is not home, for instance. Yes. So, but there you have like a very, very low, only in 1/3 of the cases, really, will you have a child that actually speaks the X language. That's according to this study, which was a fairly large study, but so far it remains the only one with data about that. I mean, in a big study, this was with over 1,700 families. Yeah. So these home language choice patterns in and of themselves, well, there's got to be underlying reasons, of course, yes. But at any rate, at a more global level, it's these home language choice patterns that it can explain a lot. So to support harmonious bilingualism, it is best if both parents in bilingual settings speak the non-school language at home, and at most one parent speaks the school language as well. Well, I don't know. But that's not always possible, as I just mentioned. And also it's not all, of course. So here let's look at Leah. Leah, who lives in lived in Bruges, Belgium, Dutch speaking. And she spoke at age 3. She spoke fluent Dutch and she understood some English. So she had an American father who spoke English to her, but who was out working a lot. And she said in English, she said only yes and no. She understood some English. But this greatly angered her English-speaking father, who claimed she was rejecting him. So here we see definitely a lack of harmonious bilingualism. It's when parents also get upset because of things having to do with their children's language use, or in this case, lack of it. So he spent very little time speaking to Leah. He denied also that it was of any importance. He actually quoted Chomsky to me, saying that input doesn't matter. And Chomsky said so. Well, I'm not sure that Chomsky actually said it this way, but definitely he has not given much attention to the role of input. He hasn't really done any research on it either. Anyway, this is what this father used as an excuse for, no, it's her fault. It's my child's fault. She's rejecting me. Well, there's this myth that children pick up languages like that, just like that. And that, it's just not the case. It's an absolute myth. They do not just pick up languages just like that. No. What is a fact is that young children need sustained, frequent regular input in each of two languages in order to learn them and in order to learn to use them. So to support harmonious bilingualism, caregivers in bilingual families should speak to children very frequently in both languages. That's difficult to do sometimes. Yes, it's a lot of hard work, especially when, children are very young and it's very tiring anyway. But this is so important if you care about their language development, and it's going to lay the ground for their later language development. Now, the importance of language input. Research base is still rather thin, though, unfortunately, but especially research comparing observed parental engagement with infants in bilingual families and bilingual development is rare. But what's well documented is, as I mentioned before, that children speak the language they hear more often, better than the less frequently heard language. And what is super important is book reading. Book reading to children in two languages greatly supports lexical development, regardless of the general exposure. So even if you cannot really do it, like speak one of the languages very regularly, at least have that language present in book reading. And why is lexical development so important? Well, you need words to build sentences. Without words, you cannot build sentences, okay? But there's more. In order for young children to learn to speak two languages, they must actually need to speak them. I mentioned it before, and now I'm going to say a little more about that. And that's going to be the last point before I conclude. So to support harmonious bilingualism, caregivers must create a necessity, a need for children to respond in the same language that they are speaking to children within a particular conversation. So that's what, I'm going to talk about the importance of parental discourse strategies. So discourse strategies, and this relies basically on the work, and very important work, of Elizabeth Lanza, who proposed the bilingual family interaction model. So that term is my own, together with Janice Nakamura, BIFIM. I think we need to talk about BIFIM a lot more, the bilingual family interaction model. So BIFIM describes how parents respond to 2-year-old or to any bilingual children's use of a societal language or the school language that the parent is not speaking to them in a particular conversation. And Lanza showed that parental responses, so these are, in fact, discourse strategies. That's all it is. It's an expensive term for just like, how do you talk back to your child? That's all it means. They help explain why 2-year-old bilingually raised children may speak just a single language. So, and together with Janice Nakamura, I systematically reviewed 22 observational studies across the globe. We only found 22, unfortunately, not more, with micro-level analyses of dyadic parent-child interactions. That means just interactions between one parent and one child. And these, we spread it out. Lanza only looked at 2-year-olds, but we looked at children between ages 1 and 12. So we also have kind of a developmental perspective there. And Lanza's BIFIM, this is basically what she's saying. So the question is, what do parents do? Parents who normally speak one language, language A, to children, what do they do if children speak the other language, let's call it language alpha, to them, or when they use a mixed utterance? So that means an utterance with words from both languages. So you can have a monolingual discourse strategy, for instance, and the best monolingual discourse strategy is what's called the minimal grasp strategy. So that's a request for clarification. So you use language A to ask children to clarify, what, their utterance. You just say, what? What did you mean? And the expectation is that children respond by changing to language A. So when your child said something in Portuguese, but you don't speak Portuguese, and you're in Portugal, you don't speak Portuguese to your child, you speak Cantonese to your child, and you want your child to speak Cantonese. They said something in Portuguese, you're just going to ask, what? What did you say? And you're going to ask that in Cantonese. And typically, children will change back and say something in Cantonese. Yes, typically they will. And if they don't, you just have to go on with it a little bit. And then maybe you can use what's called the expressed guess strategy, which is an indirect or a direct request for confirmation through a yes-no question. So then, you know, if it's clear that your child maybe is not able to use the right words in Cantonese in this example, you will ask them in Cantonese, oh, is this what you meant? Did you mean to ask for apple juice? You know, something like that. That translates what you thought children were wanting to say. Again, the expectation is, and children will usually respond back in this case, Cantonese. You could also just repeat what the child said and just repeat it in the right language. I mean, the right language, in the language that you're expecting the child to use in that particular conversation. So there's no request there for children to respond, although some children will repeat that repetition in this case, in that example, in Cantonese. But it's not clear that it's really a monolingual discourse strategy. And I don't know why this is jumping back. I'm so sorry. Here comes the next slide. And here we go to bilingual discourse strategies. Again, adult repetition, we're not sure. Is it a monolingual or a bilingual discourse strategy? So a monolingual discourse strategy tries to steer the conversation into a monolingual conversation using just one language. Whereas a bilingual discourse strategy allows the use of two languages within the same conversation. For instance, through the move on strategy. For instance, you know, parents don't even respond when their child uses Portuguese with them and they're speaking Cantonese with them. Parents don't do anything. They just listen to the Portuguese and respond to it as if it were Cantonese. So parents continue talking in language A, so in Cantonese, children continue talking in language alpha, so in this case in Portuguese, or in mixed utterances. And that just continues and continues and continues. And this eventually children cannot use any Cantonese. They cannot speak any Cantonese. Then language switching also. Well, this is really a really sad thing, is that parents, because of what their children's language choice, parents are going to adjust and also speak the language that their child is speaking and no longer speaking Cantonese to their child in Portugal, but switch themselves to Portuguese. So, and that will then definitely, if the child's no longer hearing the non-school language, then that's definitely the end for that. And then children will not be able to communicate, in this example, with family in Hong Kong, for instance. Yeah. Okay. I'm so sorry. I don't know what is going on. Okay, what are the main findings in this review that we did? That parents do use the full range of these discourse strategies, monolingual and bilingual ones. And monolingual strategies definitely support children's use of non-societal languages, whereas bilingual strategies do not. And this confirms Lanza's BIFIM model. However, longitudinal studies are rare. And here I'm saying, giving just a short developmental overview, namely that at age 2 and below, children respond very well to monolingual strategies, and they teach them also language awareness, and that's good too. Then at preschool age, between 2 and 4, children also respond well to monolingual strategies. But if they're actively producing the non-societal language, parents don't have to use such monolingual strategies because the children their language choice is fine, right? I mean, is what parents might want. And a switch from more bilingual to monolingual strategies can increase production of the lesser used language at this stage. Then at age 4 and above, at age 4, a child is no longer that young and has a big personality already. So bilingual strategies that parents use, they contribute to children's language mixing, which is not bad. Language mixing is not bad in and of itself. The thing is, if you want children to use your language, you should, when they are very young, you should perhaps not really encourage it so much, yes? So bilingual strategies are a feature of dual lingual interactions with receptive bilingual children. So that means children who understand 2 languages speak only one. And this strategy use, whether you use a monolingual or bilingual strategies, basically relates to language proficiency when children are older. Now, unfortunately, hardly any of the bilingual parenting literature pays any attention to BIFIM. And that is a sad thing. And some people think actually it's very bad to try and force children to use a particular language. Well, look, it's no more forceful than asking a child to say please when they want something. You know, some people, when a child aged 2.5 is saying cookie, cookie, well, you know, we as parents, we don't give the cookie immediately. We say cookie, please. And until the child says please, we don't give the cookie. I mean, there's really nothing bad about that. It is part of socializing children, educating children. And, you know, a lot of these things like asking for clarifications, well, we ask for clarification all the time. There's nothing bad about it. It's just normal language use. Okay. Anyway, so yet the use of monolingual discourse strategies combined with lots of regular and high quality input in especially the non-societal language and positive attitudes towards all children's languages, they can likely greatly contribute towards bilingual families' experience with harmonious bilingualism. And with this, I thank you for your attention. Here, this is the main source for the talk.
Thank you so much, Annick. Exciting talk as always. I think we have some questions in the chat room. So let's start from, I don't know how to pronounce name, excuse me. Y-A-B-D-E-L, Hamid Atwa.
Yes.
So
yes.
The analogy, you know, question. So if, you know, the person is around. Yeah, okay. So Annick, would you like to address this question first?
Yes, definitely. The analogy is not accurate. It was said. I think this is the analogy where I'm saying that language use is also like playing a musical instrument or playing several musical instruments. And different languages have so much in common that really helps with different language learning. Well, you're quite right that different languages have so much in common, but learning to play an instrument and different instruments also has a lot in common with each other. Or the analogy could be learning different kinds of sports. The point is that this is, and let me tell you that this analogy is not just my analogy, it's widely shared with specialists in bilingualism, that language use is a skill. It is a skill. So we don't want to talk about the languages because what are they and where do they exist? That's a theoretical and philosophical problem, really, and nobody has solved that yet. But it's about language use. So in that sense, yes, it's all about a skill, and practice does make perfect, and practicing is really important. And it is true that one skill does not take away from another skill. And of course, in addition, aside from being able to speak many different languages, we can also play many different instruments and play very many different sports and excel at many other skills all at the same time. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Annick. I think we have another question from Julia or Julia. Julia, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Okay, thank you then. Sorry, trying to turning on my camera. Thank you for the opportunity. Dr. Howard, thank you, interesting presentation. I would like to address two questions. The first one is related to the statement in the presentation saying that the strong English proficiency or the strong language proficiency of a child, their L1, for example, will help their acquisition in L2. It seems that we see it as the sequential acquisition process. I'm wondering, how about the simultaneous bilinguals who acquire more than one languages at the same time? Will they face more challenges? And the second one, it was also mentioned that the clear language that is directed to the child, especially the clear articulation, is crucial. So I'm wondering, what does it mean by the clear articulation? Does it have anything to do with the native-like accuracy? Because on the next point, you also mentioned that meaningful interaction is also crucial, while for maybe Asian people, we do not really interact or using English only with the native speaker of English. We use it, can I say, lingua franca between or among Asian people. And speaking on the clear articulation wise, I don't think it refers or it adhere more on the native-like accuracy. I would love to listen to your idea on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, those are two very, very big questions. First of all, about the simultaneous bilingual. So the children who have had two languages from birth. Well, what has been shown, not, first and foremost by myself, but also by many others, is that in fact, both languages in the first 6 years of life, in terms of the morphosyntactic structure, so the way the words are put together, the grammar, the morphological, the morphemes, these two languages develop on very parallel, different, distinct paths. So there is no support on the morphosyntactic level from one language to the other. This is super different from children who indeed start learning a second language once they already have learned the basics of a first language. Very different. So that's not to say that on the lexical level that there cannot be support from one language to the other in simultaneously bilingual children, but on the morphosyntactic level, there really isn't, and there is uneven development. So one language can be very well developed and the other language much less so. And it can change as children grow a little older. So that's the first thing. The second thing about clarity of articulation is I really meant that. I'm not talking about native language or anything. I'm just talking about how do you speak to a baby? That's the thing that I was mentioning about how do you speak to a baby? Do you speak clearly like I am? I am speaking quite exaggerating a little bit because I'm speaking online, and I know that there are many people who do not have English as a first language, perhaps, and so I'm speaking a little slower also. So to babies, if I'm speaking, let me give you an example from my first language, Dutch, how I would speak clearly to a baby. Hallo, en hoe gaat het? En is de fles lekker? Is het goed? So I am pronouncing, whereas if I were speaking much less clearly, oh, gaat het? En is het goed? Hoe? I would mumble more. I cannot mumble because I don't typically mumble myself, but there are people who mumble, in any language. Yeah. So that was what that point was about. And you're talking about, so your question about then connecting this with native accents or whatever, it's really not, that wasn't the point I was making. But indeed, children will learn the accent of the person that they are hearing a language from, at least when they're very young. Yeah, that's not going to be their only source, and it can change as they get older. Well, yeah. Anyway, I think that is a different issue. Sorry, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annick and Solia, for your questions. Okay, I think next one we have some question from Komova.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Komova, are you here with us? If so, would you like to ask the question yourself?
No, she cannot, because she's in the library and she cannot speak.
Oh,
She's
sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
So then apart from bilingual development and strategies, what other aspects of family bilingualism and multilingualism need more attention? So Annick, for you.
Oh, yeah. What other? Well, basically is the frequency with which people speak to their children, the absolute frequency that needs to be much more a focus in research. So your question was about the research. So that is what I think is really important. It's hard to measure, but there are ways of doing it. But I think we need to go much more again to multiple case studies, longitudinal, multiple longitudinal case studies that really document how much people are speaking to children. And of course, in what way as well. Yeah, not just about the frequency, but then also about, the quality of, I think we need a lot more that way.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. Okay, next one is from Hannah. Hannah, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I'm also in the cafe, so I hope the sounds don't bother. I was just wondering, as a PhD student, I would be interested in hearing your view on translanguaging perspective, perhaps. Like, if translanguaging scholars might say that to your BIFM or to these monolingual discourse strategies, they might argue or critique that, we should allow children to freely and creatively use their languages. And I was wondering what would be your response as a bilingualism researcher?
Okay, I think we need to make a very, very clear separation between what happens in the home and what happens in institutions like preschool and school. In the home, if parents have a right to want their children to speak their language. Yeah. So harmonious bilingualism for me is central. Harmonious, the well-being for bilingual children is for me central. Whatever, that is central. So, and I know, and it's being confirmed and confirmed and confirmed again and again and again, how important it is that children actually are able to speak the language that is not used in the school, the main language of the society, that they're able to speak their family language. And being that is so important, we need all the help we can get to help families get to that point. And, it's just like when I do a lot of consulting with parents of young bilingual children all over the world. And this is one of the main questions we get is like, my child is not speaking my language. What can I do? Please help. And so then when I give advice, like tips on how to get children to speak the family language, and I get then 2 weeks later, I get these emails from mothers saying they're overjoyed. Finally, their child, for the first time in their lives, has said a word in their family language. And they're so happy. Yeah. Now, this is super important. And the thing is, when you then talk about translanguaging, actually the translanguaging approach has been developed to help children also in educational institutions, mostly in educational institutions, to help children, to help support their family language. So it's not contrary to it at all, really. And of course, I'm all for, in fact, I think I was one of the very first ever in the not long after Jim Cummins to propose, but I wrote it in Dutch, so it doesn't really exist, but to propose that in schools that teachers would allow the use of all languages that children bring to the classroom, and that there would be language awareness projects around the different languages and so forth. So although I do not like the term translanguages, and I know, it's been used in many different ways, I do absolutely support strategies to actively engage all the languages that children bring to the classroom, right? Because I think that is a major problem also that's working against harmonious bilingualism, is that schools are so stuck on one language only, and many schools actually forbid the use of any other language than the school language, even on the playground and so forth, and that is horrendous. Yeah, and that is not a good thing. So I hope that with this I've answered your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And given our time limit, probably the next one will be the last question. So Michael and another Li Hao. So I apologize for you if you have questions, not addressed by now. Please email Dr. Annick de Houwer. And I think the last question is from Paula. Paula, would you like to ask the question yourself, or you want to read it?
Well, yeah, I can ask it. It's a little bit long, so I'm gonna read it. I think it's kind of, the answers might be kind of related to the answer to the previous one, but it's a slightly different context. This is related to the challenges that families face and parents face. And I think one of the challenges can be related to the fact that children also have their own preferences about language use, and parents can try to increment the exposure to a language and implement certain practices that on paper can be great, but they might not work for the child. Because sometimes the child is just not in the mood to use a language, or I don't know, there might be different reasons behind it. So sometimes parents feel frustrated because their strategies that they implement are supposed to work, but they don't work. So what would you recommend? What recommendation would you give to parents in that situation?
Yeah.
Thank you, by the way, your talk was amazing.
Thanks very much. Okay, thank you for your question. Well, actually, I think very often what happens here, it boils down to what parents have done already in the second year of life and how they've responded to their child's language choice in the second year of life. And have they paid attention to which language children used in their early words? Often parents are so happy that their child is speaking at all that they don't pay attention to which language children are using. So they will, if parents from the very start accept words in the wrong language at that moment, in that conversation, because this is conversation based, you can speak 2 languages to your child. That's okay, that's fine. But within each conversation, you should probably stick to 1 language if you are at all interested in your child speaking that language. Yes. So, of course, I cannot tell people to be interested in that or not, but most people are. Most people want their child to learn to speak their language, and they get upset only when, they get worried only when children are like 3 or 3.5, and that's often already too late. Because that's when this thing that you're referring to, that's when that's definitely happening. Yeah. But that means already the groundwork, already this child has been using undesired, let me put it that way, maybe, language already for a year before. So a year in a 3-year-old child's life is very long. That's a third of their life, yeah? So they're really used to, they've already built up habits. So it is not impossible to change that with children between ages 3 and 4. Afterwards, it becomes extremely hard to change that, extremely difficult. And usually it will always be the school language, the preschool language, that is going to be the preferred language. It's usually not the other way around. So what do you have to do? You have to motivate children. And you can use, for instance, and this is something I really I recommend to young parents of children that age group between 2 and 4, is to use puppets, hand puppets, to get like this hand puppet, to make like a hand puppet. Oh, we've got a package coming from Brazil. We've got a package coming from Brazil, and we live in Australia. Oh, it's coming from Brazil. Oh, look at that. Here's the hand puppet. Oh, only speaks Portuguese, of course. No, doesn't speak English. No, but look at this important hand puppet. So make it exciting, build some excitement into the language and something that interests the child and makes the child, and then you play little games. Obviously you're going to use just Portuguese with the hand puppet, and you're going to ask the child, oh, can you say that? Can you read this book to the hand puppet in Portuguese? Children between 2 and 4 will accept this. Over 4, it's a little too childish for them, right? So yes, you can change this, but you need extra tools. And to avoid that this has been going on, you need to really be quite aware of your own language choice and your child's language choice earlier, and use those discourse strategies earlier. But a lot of people, of course, they have a lot more to do than just pay attention to their child's language choice. They're dealing with jobs and juggling all kinds of things. So, but this is a strategy that can help. And what can help at a later time, but this may not necessarily affect the language choice within the family, is when children in a country where the family comes from, that they link up with kids, make friends there. But that doesn't necessarily, once they've set, there is this habit of speaking a particular language with a parent, and only one language, that's going to stick. Usually that's going to stick, like it is with all of us. If you meet a new partner, you're dating and you meet somebody in a particular language, it's going to be so hard to change that language later on, because language is part of the relationship. Yeah, that's all I can say about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very great. I think all the time when I hear Annick's talk, I feel you give people very practical tips. People can really take it and use it in their daily life. Thank you so much, and for your sharing. So now it's almost the end of the talk. And first of all, again, thank you very much for Annick's precious time to be with us this afternoon. Also, I would like to thank you, all of you who come to this webinar. And so, yeah, now I can say my name is Sun He. I'm a senior research scientist at National Institute of Education, and I'm the chairperson of NIE Bilingualism SISG Special Interest Group. And so I have invited several very, very nice speakers this year to give a series of talks, and you can expect something more in the upcoming weeks. So we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. And actually, I also want to use this platform to thank my 2 assistants, Nat and Shanice, for their great help to make this, this series come true. So thank you so much, Nat and Shanice. Okay, so I know we have a lot of questions. You still have many interesting, exciting questions for Annick. Please do email Annick. And I also received a request for the video today. Later on, we will double check with Annick and see her permission to use this video.
Sure.
So we will let.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Annick. So then Shirley, I think you can get a link from us. Okay, Shirley. Okay. Now that's the end of today's talk. Thank you so much for your attention and wish you a good night. Bye bye.